I heard him say my name once. Just once. And it was to a room full of men I had never seen before. Stephanie Reid. Omega. Unmatched. She's yours until the debt is cleared. That was it. No eye contact. No hesitation. Not even the decency of guilt on his face. Conrad Voss traded me like a used car with bad mileage, and walked back to his throne before the door finished closing behind me. I told myself I would survive whatever came next. I told myself I would stay numb, stay quiet, stay invisible. But then Jasper looked at me from across that compound, and something in his eyes wasn't what I expected. It wasn't hunger. It wasn't cruelty. It was recognition. Like he had been waiting for something he couldn't name, and I had just walked through the gate wearing its face. I should have run. God, I should have run. But my feet wouldn't move, and my heart, the stupid, traitorous thing, already knew why. The zip tie bit into my left wrist worse than my right. I noticed that detail the way you notice small things when the big things are too large to look at directly. The plastic edge. The specific angle of the dig. The fact that whoever had bound my hands had done it before, efficiently, without hesitation, which told me everything I needed to know about where I was going and what they expected me to be when I arrived. Outside the van window, Oregon slid past in the dark. I didn't know it was Oregon yet. I only knew it was raining and that the trees were enormous and that we had been driving for a long time on roads that stopped being paved about 40 minutes ago. The van rattled over gravel and root, and I pressed my shoulder against the cold metal door, and I breathed. In, out, in, out. I had learned that trick early. When Conrad Voss raised his voice in a room, you breathed slowly, and you made your face into something neutral, and you waited for it to pass. It always passed. The trick was not to give it anything to feed on while it was happening. I used that same trick now. There were two men in the front of the van. Neither one had spoken to me since we left the Voss estate. They had spoken to each other twice, short, clipped exchanges about road conditions, about the gate code, about something called the North Perimeter. Their voices were flat and professional and completely indifferent to the woman zip-tied in the back of their vehicle, which was somehow worse than cruelty would have been. Cruelty would have meant I registered. This was just logistics. I pressed my forehead against the cold window glass and watched the trees, and I thought about the moment it happened. The moment Conrad slid that paper across his desk without looking up. I had been standing in his office for 11 minutes before he acknowledged me. I knew because there was a clock on the wall behind his left shoulder, dark wood, brass hands. And I had counted every second of those 11 minutes because counting was something to do that wasn't feeling. When he finally looked up, his expression was the same one he used for quarterly budget reviews. Tired. Efficient. Already past it. The road pack of Crestfall, he said. They're owed $200,000. I don't have liquid assets in that range right now. You'll serve in my place until the debt is satisfied. Arrangements have been made. That was the whole conversation. I had opened my mouth. I don't know what I meant to say. I don't know if there were even words for it. And he had already looked back down at his papers. The men behind me had moved forward. And that was that. 11 years. 11 years as the only Omega in the Voss pack. 11 years of being useful, being present, being whatever the situation required. And at the end of it, I was a line item. A liquid asset in a range he could manage. The van stopped. I hadn't noticed us slowing down. I had been so far inside the memory that the sudden stillness jolted me forward, and I caught myself against the back of the front seat with my bound hands. And I heard one of the men say something into a radio. A gate. Metal scraping concrete. The van rolling forward again, slower now. And then, light. Not warm light. Work light. The kind that comes from industrial floods mounted high on chain link fencing. The kind that turns everything beneath it flat and overexposed. It poured through the van windows and I blinked against it. And when my eyes adjusted, I saw the compound for the first time. It was not what I expected. I don't know what I expected. Something worse, maybe. Something that looked more like punishment. But the compound was functional, orderly. A cluster of concrete block buildings arranged around a central clearing, vehicles parked in deliberate rows, equipment stacked and covered against the rain. It looked like a place where people worked, where people lived, where people had rules they followed because they had chosen to follow them, not because someone above them demanded it. The van doors opened. Rain hit me immediately, cold and direct, soaking through my jacket in the first 3 seconds. One of the men helped me out, not roughly, not gently, just mechanically, and I stood on the wet gravel, and I looked up. 3 men stood at the edge of the light. They weren't standing together the way a welcoming committee stands together. They were spread apart, each one occupying his own space, which told me they were used to being in charge and not used to sharing it. They were watching the van, watching me step out of it. The one in the center was the tallest. Dark jacket, arms crossed, jaw set like he had made a decision about this situation before I even arrived, and was simply waiting for reality to confirm it. His eyes found me immediately and didn't move, and something about the directness of it made my breath catch in a way I didn't have language for yet. Jasper. I didn't know his name yet, but I felt it. The weight of his attention like a physical thing, like a hand pressed flat against my sternum. The one on the left was broader, restless energy barely contained under a still surface. He looked at me the way you look at something you've already decided you don't want. The one on the right had his hands in his pockets and was almost smiling, except his eyes weren't. None of them spoke. The rain came down, and then Jasper, the one in the center, the one whose gaze hadn't left me, tilted his head slightly, just a fraction, like he was listening for something underneath the sound of the rain, like he had caught a scent he wasn't expecting. His jaw tightened, and something shifted in his eyes that I couldn't read and wasn't sure I was supposed to see. I stood there in the floodlights, soaking wet, zip-tied, traded like a debt note, and I made myself hold his gaze, because I was done looking away. Nobody cut the zip tie for 4 minutes. I counted. The 2 men from the van exchanged paperwork with a 4th man who appeared from the nearest building, short, efficient, clipboard in hand, and they spoke in low voices about transfer logistics and debt terms and a verification process that apparently required signatures in 3 places. I stood 6 feet away from all of it, rain soaking through my shoes now, and I was simply present, a package awaiting processing. The one I would later learn was Reddington hadn't stopped looking at me with that particular expression. Not hunger, not hatred. Something closer to suspicion sharpened into resentment, which I understood better than either of the other 2 options. Resentment meant he had already decided I was a problem. Problems I knew how to navigate. Problems had edges you could map. Maverick, the one on the right with his hands still in his pockets, had shifted his almost smile into something more neutral the moment the clipboard appeared. He was watching the paperwork process with the kind of careful attention that didn't look like careful attention, which told me he was smarter than the relaxed posture suggested. Jasper hadn't moved. He was still standing where he had been when I stepped out of the van, still watching me with that fractional tilt to his head, still carrying that expression I couldn't categorize. The rain hit his jacket and ran off, and he didn't seem to notice it. He was entirely focused on something I couldn't identify, and it made the back of my neck prickle in a way that wasn't entirely fear. The clipboard man finished his process. The van men got back in their vehicle. The gate scraped open and closed, and the red tail lights disappeared into the tree line, and just like that, the last visible connection to Conrad Voss and everything before this moment was gone. The 4 of us stood in the rain. Jasper finally moved. He walked toward me with a particular kind of deliberateness, not slow, not fast, just completely intentional, like every step was a choice he had already examined. He stopped 2 feet away, and I held myself very still the way I had learned to hold myself, and I looked up at him, because he was tall enough that looking anywhere else would have been obvious. Up close, his eyes were darker than I had registered from a distance. Not black, a deep, specific brown that caught the floodlight and held it. There was a scar along his left jawline, thin and old, the kind that had finished its story years ago. He reached into his jacket pocket and produced a small folding knife. My heart rate did something embarrassing. He saw it. I know he saw it because something in his expression shifted, not softer, exactly, but careful, deliberate in a new way. "Turn around," he said. His voice was low, not gentle, not harsh. The voice of a man who was used to being obeyed and had stopped needing to perform authority to achieve it. I turned around. The knife blade slid cleanly under the zip tie. One motion. The plastic fell away and the blood rushed back into my wrists with that specific burning sensation that made me press my lips together to keep the sound inside. "Let me see." I turned back. He was already looking at my wrists, at the red bands the plastic had left, at the place where the left one had bitten deeper. He didn't reach for them. He just looked, with that same deliberate attention he had given everything else, and the assessment in his expression was clinical, I told myself. It was clinical. It didn't feel clinical. It felt like being seen by someone who was angry about what they were seeing and hadn't decided yet who to be angry at. "You eat today?" he said. The question surprised me enough that I answered honestly. "No." Something moved across his face. There and gone. He turned toward the buildings. Maverick. Maverick was already moving. On it. Reddington had not moved from his position and had not changed his expression, and when Jasper turned back toward the largest building, he fell into steps slightly behind and to the left, not subservient, but practiced. The geometry of men who had operated together long enough that they had stopped needing to negotiate space. I followed because there was nowhere else to go. The building they led me into was warmer than I expected. Concrete walls, yes. Exposed ductwork, yes. But there was a long wooden table scarred with years of use, and a wood stove in the corner radiating real heat, and the smell of the place hit me the moment I crossed the threshold. Pine, wood smoke, and something else. Something underneath the industrial and the practical, something that had no business being in a rogue compound in the middle of a rain-soaked Oregon night. Something warm and dark and specific. 3 distinct threads of it, actually, woven into the walls and the furniture and the air itself. My body recognized it before my brain did. My brain said, "This is a building. These are strangers. You are a debt payment. You are here to survive." My body said something else entirely. It said, "Here." I stopped walking. Jasper was 3 steps ahead, and he stopped too. Not because he heard me stop. I hadn't made a sound, but because he felt it. I saw the change move through his shoulders. A slight arrest. A recalibration. He turned, and for the first time since I had stepped out of that van, his expression gave something away. Not much. A fraction. The space between controlled and almost not. His nostrils flared once, and then his jaw locked down over whatever that fraction had been, and his face was deliberate again, and he looked at me with those dark, careful eyes and said nothing. Maverick appeared from a side room with a plate of food and a bottle of water and stopped when he felt the quality of the silence. He looked at Jasper, then at me, then back at Jasper. "Well," he said quietly, and his almost smile returned, and it was different now. Complicated. Like he had just understood something he wasn't sure he wanted to understand. "Okay then." Reddington made a sound in the back of his throat that wasn't a word, turned sharply, and walked back out into the rain. And I stood there in the warm, smoke-scented air with my wrists still burning and my heart doing something I had no framework for. And I understood, with the specific clarity of someone who has spent years reading rooms, that something had just happened in this compound. Something none of us had agreed to. Something none of us knew how to stop. Maverick set the plate on the table in front of me like he was buying himself something to do with his hands. Scrambled eggs. 2 pieces of toast. A cup of something hot that turned out to be black coffee when I wrapped my fingers around it and inhaled. Simple food. Real food. The kind that didn't require performance or presentation, which told me more about this place than anything else had so far. I sat down because my legs were making the decision for me. Jasper stood at the far end of the table with his arms crossed and his eyes on the wood stove, and the quality of his stillness was different now than it had been outside. Outside it had been authority. This was something else. This was a man running a very controlled internal argument. I picked up the fork and ate because I hadn't eaten, and because eating gave me something to look at that wasn't him. The eggs were good. Someone in this compound knew how to cook, which was a detail so mundane and so human that it cracked something small in the wall I was holding myself behind. I pressed it back into place immediately. "The room situation," Maverick said, dropping into the chair across from me with his elbows on the table, "is that you've got the end unit in the east block. It locks from the inside. Key's already in the door." I looked up at him. "Locks from the inside," I repeated. That's what I said. I hadn't expected that. I hadn't expected any of this. Not the food, not the heat, not the deliberate way Jasper had cut the zip tie like it offended him personally. I had expected something closer to what the word rogue implied. Something raw. Something that confirmed every terrible thing I had imagined on that drive through the dark. "You look surprised," Maverick said. "I am surprised." He nodded like that was a reasonable thing to be and didn't elaborate, which I appreciated more than I could have explained. The door opened behind me, and Reddington came back in, rain damp, and carrying the specific energy of someone who had gone outside to have a feeling and had not successfully resolved it. He moved to the kitchen area on the far side of the room and poured himself coffee and stood with his back to us, and that was pointed. That was a man making a choice about where to put his body so he wouldn't have to negotiate his expression. Jasper finally moved away from the wood stove. He pulled out the chair at the head of the table and sat down and looked at me directly, and I made myself look back. "You understand the arrangement," he said. It wasn't a question. "I understand what I was told," I said. "Conrad Voss owes your pack $200,000. I'm here until it's paid." Something crossed his face at Conrad's name. Quick and dark. "That's the arrangement on paper," he said. "Is there a different one?" He was quiet for a moment. The wood stove ticked. Rain against the roof. "You're not a prisoner here," he said finally. "You're not," he stopped. Chose the next word carefully. "You're not what he sent you here to be." I looked at him steadily. What did he send me here to be? The silence that followed was its own answer. Reddington turned from the counter. "Jasper." His voice carried a warning I didn't fully understand yet. Jasper held my gaze. "It doesn't matter what he intended. What matters is what this pack decides. And this pack doesn't operate that way." I wanted to believe him. That was the dangerous part. I wanted to believe him with an immediacy that frightened me, because wanting to believe someone was exactly how you ended up zip-tied in the back of a van at midnight, having believed the wrong person for 11 years. "Okay," I said. "You don't believe me," he said. "I don't know you," I said. "Believing you isn't available yet." Something shifted in his eyes. Not offense. Something that looked, unexpectedly, like respect. Maverick made a quiet sound that might have been a laugh if it had been given more room to breathe. Reddington set his coffee mug down on the counter with more force than necessary and turned fully around and looked at me for the first time since we had come inside. Really looked. The resentment was still there, but underneath it something was working. Something was grinding through a calculation he hadn't finished yet. "You're an Omega," he said. "Not cruel. Just direct. Stating a variable." "Yes," I said. "From the Voss pack." "Yes." "For how long?" 11 years. Something moved through all three of them at that. A collective shift, subtle and involuntary. The way a room full of people reacts to a sound they all heard, but none of them want to be the first to name. 11 years, Reddington said, and his voice had changed. Still guarded. But the edge of it was different now. "And he traded you for a debt." "Yes." He looked at Jasper. A long look, loaded with something that had history in it. Then he pushed off the counter and walked toward the far hallway without another word. And this time, when he left the room, it felt less like rejection and more like a man removing himself before he said something he wasn't ready to say. Maverick watched him go. Then he looked at me with those careful eyes that saw more than his easy posture suggested. And he said quietly, "He's not angry at you." "I know," I said. And I did know. I had spent 11 years learning the difference between anger that was aimed at you and anger that was wearing you as a costume, because the real target was somewhere out of reach. Jasper was still watching me. I could feel it the way you feel sunlight on the side of your face, directional, warm in a way that was almost uncomfortable, impossible to ignore without making the ignoring obvious. I drank my coffee. He watched the side of my face. And the scent in the room, that layered, impossible warmth I had walked into and hadn't been able to walk away from, tightened around something in my chest like it was learning the shape of me. Like it had already decided something my brain hadn't caught up to yet. I set down the mug. "Where's the east block?" I said. Jasper stood. "I'll take you. I can find it." "It's dark," he said. "And you don't know the compound." "Then tell me the direction." He looked at me for a long moment. That internal argument again, running just beneath the surface of his controlled expression. "East," he said quietly. "Third door." I nodded. I picked up the key Maverick had set on the table at some point without my noticing. I walked toward the door, and I felt Jasper's gaze on my back the entire way, not possessive, not predatory. Something far more dangerous than either of those things. Something that felt like it was already grieving the distance I was putting between us. I pushed out into the rain and I walked east, and I did not look back. The third door had a deadbolt that actually worked. I know because I turned it 3 times after I got inside, checking it with my palm flat against the wood each time, feeling the mechanism hold. It held. I stood there in the dark with my hand on the door and my forehead almost touching the wood, and I breathed. In, out, in, out. The room was small. A cot with a real mattress and 2 wool blankets folded at the foot of it. A wooden dresser with 3 drawers. A single window that looked out onto the tree line, rain streaking the glass in long diagonal lines. A lamp on the dresser that came on when I found the switch, throwing warm yellow light across everything. No mirror. I noticed the absence of it the way you notice the absence of something you didn't know you were looking for. No mirror meant I couldn't see what 11 hours of being traded looked like on my face. I wasn't sure if that was mercy or denial, but I accepted it either way. I sat on the edge of the cot. The wool blanket smelled like cedar and wood smoke, and underneath that, faint but unmistakable, that same layered warmth I had walked into in the main building. Like the compound itself was saturated with it. Like there was no square foot of this place that didn't carry some trace of the 3 men who ran it. I lay down without taking my shoes off, and I stared at the ceiling, and I told myself I would not cry. I didn't cry. I did not sleep either. I lay there while the rain worked itself into something harder against the window, and the wind picked up in the tree line, and I cataloged what I knew. The compound was organized. The men who ran it had rules. The room locked from the inside. Nobody had touched me. Nobody had threatened me. The eggs had been good. These were small things. They were the only things I had. Sometime in the deep middle of the night, the wind changed. It came from the north, which I knew because the window faced north and the rain suddenly drove directly against the glass instead of diagonally across it. The temperature in the room dropped in a way that had nothing to do with the window. I checked it, it was latched, and a sound started somewhere in the roof space above me. A groan of timber under pressure. Long and low and structural. Then the lamp went out. Generator, I thought. The wind took the generator. I sat up in complete darkness and I listened to the compound, and what I heard was urgency. Voices outside, distant but moving fast. Footsteps on gravel. Something metal being dragged. The organized sound of people responding to a problem they had planned for. Then something closer. A knock at my door. Not aggressive. Specific. 2 knocks. A pause. One more, like a code. Or like someone who understood that an unknown knock in the dark was not a neutral experience for a woman in my position. I sat very still. Stephanie. Maverick's voice. Through the door. Low and direct, the humor entirely absent. The north roof on this block is compromised. I need you to move. I was at the door before I finished deciding to move. Deadbolt back, door open, rain and cold driving in immediately. Maverick stood in the doorway with a flashlight and a jacket that he held out to me, without preamble. Behind him the compound was alive with movement, shadows crossing through the floodlights that had come back on. Battery backup, I registered, and the north end of the east block had a visible problem. A section of roofing material had peeled back in the wind, and the structure beneath it was making that sound again. That low, load-bearing groan. I took the jacket. It was too large and smelled overwhelmingly of that compound warmth, and I pulled it on anyway, because the rain was immediate and cold and survival was practical. Maverick moved. I followed. He took me across the central clearing toward the largest building, the main block, where I had eaten, where the wood stove was. And the rain came down in sheets now, genuine Pacific Northwest violence, the kind that didn't apologize. By the time we pushed through the main building door, I was soaked from the knees down again and breathing hard from the cold. The main room was lit by 2 battery lanterns on the long table. Jasper was already there, standing over a hand-drawn site map spread across the table, talking in low, rapid sentences to a man I hadn't seen before. Reddington stood at the window watching the north block with his arms crossed, and his jaw working slowly like he was chewing through a decision. Jasper looked up when we came in. His eyes went to me first, then to the jacket I was wearing, his assessment landing on it for exactly 1 second before moving back to my face. He said nothing about it. Sit, he said, and it wasn't unkind, and he turned back to the map. I sat at the long table, and I watched the 3 of them work, and I understood that I was seeing something I wasn't meant to see quite yet. Not the emergency. The emergency was just weather. I was seeing how they operated together. The specific grammar of 3 people who had built something real out of circumstances that were supposed to produce nothing but wreckage. Jasper directed without raising his voice. Reddington executed without requiring explanation. Maverick moved between them, translating, not language, but intention, filling the gaps between 2 men who communicated in compressed half-sentences and expected the other to complete the thought. It was functional in the way that only genuine trust produces. I had lived 11 years inside the Voss pack, and I had never seen anything that looked like this. The stranger left with a radio and a set of instructions, And then it was just the four of us, and the storm, and the battery lanterns throwing soft moving shadows across the walls. Reddington turned from the window. He looked at the jacket I was wearing, and something moved across his face that he shut down immediately. "North Block'll hold till morning," he said. Probably. Maverick agreed pleasantly. "She can't go back to that room tonight," Jasper said. "Not a question." "No," Maverick said. Reddington said nothing, which, I was learning, was its own kind of answer. Jasper looked at me. "You'll stay in here tonight. Couch is behind you. It's not the cot, but the roof above it is solid." I turned. There was indeed a couch against the back wall, wide, worn, buried under a blanket that looked like it had been there since the building was built. I turned back. All three of them were looking at me, and none of them were making it strange except that it was strange. It was profoundly strange, because the air in this room was doing that thing again. That tightening. That warm, impossible pressure that had no business existing between a debt payment and the men she had been paid to. "Okay," I said. Jasper nodded and looked back at his map. Maverick dropped into the chair nearest the wood stove and propped his boots on the edge of the hearth and closed his eyes, which I suspected was performance. Reddington looked at me for one more second, that grinding calculation still running behind his eyes, still unresolved. And then he pulled a second blanket from a cabinet and set it on the end of the couch without a word and walked to the far side of the room and sat with his back to the wall and his eyes on the window. I lay down on the couch and pulled both blankets up and stared at the timber ceiling while the storm pressed against the walls of the building and the wood stove ticked and three men breathed in the same room as me. I could feel all three of them even with my eyes closed. Not dangerously, just present, like a warmth that had decided where I was and wasn't willing to pretend otherwise. I was still telling myself it meant nothing when I finally, accidentally, fell asleep. I woke up because someone was making coffee. Not because of the sound. The storm had softened overnight into a steady low rain and the compound was quiet enough that small sounds carried. But because of the smell. Dark roast, slightly burnt at the edges, the specific smell of a percolator left on too long, and underneath it that layered warmth that I was beginning to understand was simply the atmosphere of this place. Of these men. I kept my eyes closed for a moment. I was aware, in the particular way you become aware of things when you wake up in an unfamiliar place, of exactly where I was and exactly what had happened to bring me here. I had learned that trick too. Never let the first 30 seconds of consciousness be soft. Map the room before you open your eyes. Know what you're waking up into. Wood stove, lower now, but still going. Rain on the roof. The couch beneath me solid and real. Two blankets, one of which Reddington had put there without being asked. I opened my eyes. Jasper was at the kitchen counter with his back to me. Two mugs already poured, staring out the small window above the sink at the gray morning and the tree line. He was still in the same clothes from last night, jacket gone, and the set of his shoulders told me he hadn't slept. I sat up slowly. He heard it, the shift of the couch, the blankets moving, and he turned, and he held out one of the mugs across the distance between us like it was a completely ordinary thing to do. I crossed the room and took it. We stood at the counter side by side and drank coffee and looked out at the rain, and neither of us said anything for a long moment, and it was not comfortable, exactly. But it was honest. The silence had no performance in it. "How long has this pack been here?" I said finally. 6 years, he said. "In Crestfall. Just outside it. The town knows we exist. Mostly leaves us alone." I nodded. "How many people?" 31. As of last week. Something shifted in his voice on that last part. "Oh wait. I didn't ask about last week." "And the debt," I said. "Conrad's debt to you." His jaw tightened. "Just slightly. That's not a conversation for this morning," he said. "I'd like to know what I'm here for," I said. "What the actual terms are. How long?" He looked at me sideways. "You'd like to know when you get to leave." It wasn't cruel. It was just precise. "Yes," I said. He was quiet for a moment. The percolator hissed softly. "The debt is real," he said. 200,000. Voss borrowed it 3 years ago when his pack was struggling. Promised repayment inside 18 months. He paused. He never intended to pay it. Something cold settled in my stomach. "He intended to send you from the beginning," Jasper said. "The debt was leverage. The plan was always..." He stopped. His hand tightened around his mug. "It was never about money, Stephanie." I heard my name in his mouth, and something moved through me that I pressed down immediately. Then what was it about? I said. He turned to look at me fully, and his expression was careful in a way that told me what he was about to say was going to cost both of us something. He wanted you gone, Jasper said. Not dead. Just removed. Somewhere he didn't have to account for you anymore. The rain came down. I looked out the window, and I thought about 11 years. About the way Conrad Voss looked at his desk instead of at me. About the clock with the brass hands. About 11 minutes of being invisible before being handed over. I knew, I said. Jasper went very still. Not the specifics, I said. But I knew. You don't spend 11 years in a pack as the only Omega and not know when your expiration date is coming. I drank my coffee. I just didn't know the currency. The silence after that was different from the one before it. Heavier. Something in it had been opened that wasn't going to close again. The door opened behind us, and Reddington came in from outside, rain damp, boots loud on the concrete floor. He stopped when he registered us standing at the counter together, and the specific quality of the air between us and his expression did that shuddering thing again. He poured himself coffee and sat at the long table and said, "Roof on the east block needs 2 hours of work. Maybe 3. I know," Jasper said. "I'll start after breakfast." "I know," Jasper said again. Reddington looked at me. That calculation behind his eyes, still running. "You sleep?" "Some," I said. He nodded slowly. Something about the nod felt like an acknowledgement of more than the question asked. Maverick appeared from the hallway looking genuinely rested in a way that felt almost offensive and poured coffee and leaned against the counter and looked between all three of us with those eyes that saw everything. "So," he said pleasantly, "are we doing the part where we all pretend last night was just a storm?" "Maverick," Reddington said. "Because I'm fine with that," Maverick continued, unbothered. "I'm just checking what story we're telling." "We're not telling any story," Jasper said. Maverick looked at me, not unkindly, directly. "You doing okay?" The question landed differently than I expected. Not because it was surprising that someone asked, but because of how he asked it. No agenda underneath it. No calculation. Just a straightforward human question directed at me like I was a person whose answer mattered. I hadn't been asked that in a very long time. "I'm standing," I said. "That's a start," he said. And there was something in his voice that made it sound like he knew exactly what it cost to still be standing and respected it without making it into a thing. Reddington made a sound. Low, almost involuntary. Like something had shifted in him that he wasn't prepared for. I looked at him. He was looking at his coffee mug, his thumb moving slowly across the handle. Something working through him that hadn't found its way to the surface yet. "My mother was an Omega," he said. Nobody moved. In a pack outside Portland. His voice was flat, deliberate, the tone of someone excavating something carefully because the wrong angle would collapse the whole structure. Alpha there decided she was more valuable as a bargaining tool than a person. He paused. I was 7. The room held its breath. "I'm not telling you that for sympathy," he said, still looking at the mug. "I'm telling you because you should know why this." He stopped. His jaw worked. "Why I needed a minute last night." I looked at him across the length of that scarred wooden table, and I understood that what Reddington had just handed me was not a small thing. It was the most expensive thing he owned, and he had put it on the table in front of a woman he had decided 2 hours ago he didn't want here. "Thank you," I said quietly. He finally looked up. His eyes were dark and complicated and full of something that wasn't resentment anymore. Maverick was very still for once. Jasper looked at the window, and the rain came down over Crestfall like it was trying to wash something clean that had been dirty for a very long time. Reddington finished his coffee standing up. He rinsed the mug, set it upside down on the drying rack with a precision that felt like punctuation, and walked out to start on the roof without another word. But the quality of his exit was different from every other time he had left a room since I arrived. Less like escape. More like a man who had put something down and needed to go do something with his hands before he figured out how to carry it differently. Maverick watched him go. Then he looked at Jasper. Something passed between them. Wordless, compressed, the language of men who had lived through enough together that full sentences were redundant. Jasper set his mug down. "I need to check the perimeter after the storm. Could be down fencing on the north side." Maverick nodded. "I'll pull the supply inventory. We're low on a few things." They moved with the easy efficiency of a practiced morning, tasks distributing naturally, and I stood at the counter with my coffee and understood that they were also, deliberately, leaving me space. Not abandoning me in the room, leaving me space inside it. The difference was specific and intentional, and I felt it. Jasper paused at the door. He turned back and looked at me, and there was something working in his expression that hadn't been there yesterday. Something the night and the storm and the conversation at the counter had opened. "The East Block will be loud while Reddington works," he said. "You can stay in here. There's food in the kitchen." "I can help," I said. He looked at me for a moment. "With the roof?" "With whatever needs doing." Something almost imperceptible moved across his face. He considered it the way he considered everything, fully, without performance. "Maverick," he said. "She can help me with inventory," Maverick said from across the room, not looking up from the clipboard he had already produced from somewhere. Jasper nodded once, looked at me one more second. Then he was gone, and the door settled closed behind him, and the room felt different. Not emptier, just reconfigured around his absence. I moved toward Maverick. He handed me a clipboard without preamble. "Supply room's through there. I'll read. You mark. Anything below the red line gets circled." We worked for 40 minutes in the kind of quiet that was actually comfortable. Maverick had a system that was more organized than his easy exterior suggested, and he explained it without condescension, which I appreciated. We moved through the supply room, shelves of dry goods, medical supplies, tools, equipment, and the rhythm of the work settled something in me that the night had left unsettled. "You were in Voss territory your whole life?" Maverick asked at some point, marking something on his own clipboard. "Since I was 19, I said. I presented late. Omega designation didn't come until I was almost 20. Conrad's pack was the first one that made contact." "Made contact," Maverick said, and his tone held something careful in it. "Is that what it was?" I looked at a shelf of bandaging supplies and counted. It felt like a choice at the time. Most traps do. I circled a number on my clipboard. "How did you end up here?" I said. "In a rogue pack." Maverick was quiet for a moment. "Jasper built this. 6 years ago, after he left the Harem pack up in Washington. Reddington came about a year later." He paused. "I came because Jasper asked me to, and because I didn't have anywhere better to be, and because I had run out of packs that didn't require me to be something I wasn't." "What did they require you to be?" He glanced at me sideways. "Smaller," he said simply. I understood that with my whole body. We finished the inventory, and I helped Maverick carry the completed clipboard back to the main room, and he made sandwiches for lunch with the particular confidence of someone who had been feeding people for a long time and found satisfaction in it. He made 4 without being asked, 1 for Reddington, 1 for Jasper, and set them wrapped on the counter. I sat at the long table and ate, and Maverick sat across from me, and we ate in a comfortable quiet, and the rain had softened to something almost gentle against the roof, and I thought, dangerously, stupidly, that this felt like something. Not safety. Not yet. But the shape of something that could become safety if you gave it enough time and enough honesty and enough of the particular courage that comes from deciding to trust one more time when trust has already cost you everything. Jasper came back in the early afternoon. He was damp from the perimeter check, jacket beaded with water, and he moved to the kitchen and washed his hands and picked up the wrapped sandwich without comment and came to the table and sat down across from me. We were alone. Maverick had gone to find Reddington. Jasper unwrapped his sandwich and ate, and I sat with my coffee, and outside the rain moved gently through the tree line, and somewhere in the compound someone had started a radio playing low. Country music, soft and distant, the kind that sounds like it was written for exactly this kind of gray afternoon. "You did good today," he said. I looked up. "The inventory," he said. "Maverick said you were thorough. It wasn't complicated work." "No," he agreed. "But you did it anyway, without being asked twice." He looked at his sandwich. "That matters here." I watched the side of his face. The old scar along his jaw. The way he held himself even in rest. Not rigid, but present. Fully in whatever room he was in. "Jasper," I said. He looked up, and I don't know what I meant to say. I genuinely don't know what sentence I had started building when I said his name, because the moment he looked at me, directly, openly, with that dark, careful attention that had been finding me since the moment I stepped out of that van, the sentence dissolved. What replaced it was something simpler. I reached across the table. Not far. Just enough. My hand open on the scarred wood between us. Not asking for anything specific. Just open. Present. The smallest possible gesture of one person saying to another, "I am here, and I am not pretending otherwise, and I am terrified, but I am doing it anyway." He looked at my hand. Something moved through his face that he didn't try to control this time. Something real and unguarded and almost painful in its honesty. The expression of a man who had been holding himself at a specific distance from something for reasons that had made sense until this exact moment, and were now rapidly losing their architecture. He turned his hand over on the table, and his fingers closed over mine. Not tight, just there, warm and certain and present in a way that made my breath go unsteady in my chest. The radio played softly in the distance. The rain came down. Neither of us spoke because there was nothing to say that the silence wasn't already saying better. And then the door opened. Reddington stood in the doorway. His eyes went to the table, to our hands, to Jasper's face, and then to mine and back to Jasper's, and the thing that moved through his expression in that single second was so layered and so fast that I could only catch pieces of it. Recognition. Something raw. Something that looked almost like relief fighting with something that looked almost like grief. He didn't say a word. He walked to the counter, picked up the wrapped sandwich, and stood there with his back to us, very still, while the radio played and the rain came down, and something in the room shifted into a configuration that none of us had agreed to, and all of us had somehow already accepted. Reddington unwrapped his sandwich with his back still to us. The sound of the paper was very loud in the room. Jasper's fingers were still over mine, and I felt the moment he became aware of Reddington's stillness. Felt it through his hand, a slight tension moving up through his fingers like a current finding ground. He didn't pull away, but the quality of his hold changed. Became conscious of itself in a way it hadn't been 30 seconds ago. I turned my hand over slowly and drew it back. Not because I wanted to, because the room required it. Reddington turned around. His expression was assembled now, controlled in the way that costs something to maintain, and he leaned against the counter and looked at Jasper with a directness that had nothing casual in it. "We need to talk," he said. "Reddington." Maverick's voice came from the hallway, warning and tired at once, like a man who had seen this specific moment approaching from a distance and had hoped to arrive before it did. "No," Reddington said, not looking away from Jasper. "We needed to have this conversation last night, and we didn't, and now we're—" He stopped. His jaw worked. "Now we're here." Jasper sat back in his chair. His face was careful again, the openness of 60 seconds ago packed neatly away, and I watched him do it, and felt something ache in my chest that I had no right to feel yet. "Say it," Jasper said. Reddington looked at me, not with cruelty, with something that was trying very hard not to be cruelty and was mostly succeeding. "She's a debt payment," he said. "That's what she is right now. That's the legal reality of what Conrad Voss arranged, and what this pack accepted." The words landed flat and hard on the table between us. "I know what I am," I said. "Then you know that whatever is happening in this room right now," he gestured, a short frustrated motion, "it can't happen. Not while the arrangement stands. Not while she's here under those terms." "Nobody's done anything wrong," Maverick said from the doorway, his voice careful and even. "Not yet," Reddington said. The silence after that was a different shape than any silence the room had held before. This one had edges. Jasper looked at the table. His hands were flat on the wood now, both of them, fingers spread. A man pressing himself into stillness. "You think I don't know that," he said quietly. "I think you know it," Reddington said. "I think you're choosing not to look at it." "That's not—" Jasper stopped. Something moved across his face. "That's not what's happening." "Then what is happening, Jasper?" Not a question, a demand. The voice of a man who needed an answer badly enough to force the conversation nobody wanted to have. Jasper looked up, and the look on his face was the most honest thing I had seen from him since I arrived. Stripped of the authority and the deliberateness and the controlled patience. Just a man who had found something he wasn't prepared for and didn't have language for it yet. "I don't know," he said. Reddington made a sound in the back of his throat. He turned away, pressed his knuckles against the counter. I looked at Maverick in the doorway, and he looked back at me, and his expression was complicated and careful, and full of something that looked like an apology for a situation none of us had constructed. "The arrangement with Voss?" I said. Everyone looked at me. "If the debt were paid," I said slowly, "the arrangement would be void." "The debt is $200,000, Reddington said. "It's not paid." "I know it's not paid," I said. "I'm asking what happens to the arrangement if it were." The room was very quiet. "You'd be free," Jasper said. His voice had gone low. "No claim. No arrangement. No terms. Free to leave, I said. Free to do whatever you chose, he said. I looked at him steadily. And free to stay, if I chose that. The silence that followed was enormous. Reddington turned back around. His eyes moved between me and Jasper, and something in his expression cracked open just slightly at the seam. Just enough to show what was underneath it, which was not anger. Which had never really been anger. It was fear. The specific fear of a man who had watched his mother be traded and had spent his entire adult life building something that couldn't be traded, something with walls and rules and a perimeter, something that would never reduce a person to a line item, and who was now watching that something tremble at its foundation because a woman had walked in from the rain and the walls were already forgetting they were walls. Reddington, I said. He looked at me. I'm not her, I said quietly. I'm not going to be what was done to her. His breath came out of him in a long, slow, controlled exhale. I know that, he said. And the rawness in his voice on those 3 words was the most unguarded thing he had offered since he told me about his mother that morning. That's not, he stopped, pressed his hand to his face briefly. I know that. Then what are you afraid of, I said. He dropped his hand, and he looked at me with those dark, complicated eyes, and he said, that you'll leave and it'll matter. The words fell into the room and stayed there. Maverick made a quiet sound and looked at the ceiling. Jasper's hands were still flat on the table and his expression was the expression of a man watching something he had been trying to prevent happen anyway, right in front of him, inevitable and irreversible. I looked at Reddington across the length of the scarred table, and I thought about 11 years of not matching to anyone with power over me. I thought about Conrad Voss and his desk and his brass clock and his carefully signed paperwork. And I thought about the way Reddington had put a second blanket on the end of the couch without being asked. Then make sure I don't want to, I said. He stared at me. Something moved through his face that started as shock and moved through something painful and landed somewhere that looked terrifyingly like hope. And then, from outside, a vehicle, coming fast up the gravel road, engine loud and purposeful, the sound of it wrong in the way that only an unexpected arrival at a rogue compound in the middle of the afternoon is wrong. Jasper was on his feet before any of us. Maverick already had his radio. Reddington's eyes left my face and went to the window, and everything that had been open in him closed back up with a speed that was its own kind of answer. Who is it? Jasper said into the radio, low and controlled. The response came back in 3 words, and the color left Jasper's face. I watched it go. What? I said. Who is it? He looked at me, and his expression was something I had never seen on him before. It was dread. It's Conrad Voss, he said. He's at the gate. Nobody moved for 3 seconds. 3 seconds is a long time when the air has been knocked out of a room. Then Jasper said, "Don't open the gate," into the radio, and his voice was so controlled it was almost frightening. The voice of a man who had learned that falling apart was a luxury that got people killed. The radio crackled back. He's saying he has rights to the arrangement. He's saying he wants to renegotiate. Reddington made a sound that wasn't language. Maverick had stopped being relaxed entirely. He was standing in the doorway with his arms at his sides and his eyes on Jasper, and the easy humor had vacated his face so completely it was like watching a different person stand in the same body. I was still sitting at the table. I noticed that about myself, that I hadn't stood up, hadn't moved, hadn't made a single reactive motion since Jasper said the name. I was sitting with both hands flat on the scarred wood, and I was breathing. In, out, in, out. The old trick. The one that kept the big things from swallowing you while they were happening. Conrad Voss was at the gate. He had come, not to pay the debt, not to honor anything. He had come to renegotiate, which in Conrad Voss's vocabulary meant he had come to take something back or trade something worse. And the specific coldness that settled in my stomach was not panic. It was recognition. The particular recognition of someone who has been studied by a predator long enough to understand exactly how it moves. Stephanie. Jasper's voice. I looked up. He was looking at me with that direct, dark attention, and his expression was doing something complicated. Authority, and something rawer running underneath it simultaneously, like 2 rivers in the same channel. You don't have to see him, he said. I know, I said. I mean it. Whatever he says at that gate, whatever claim he thinks he's carrying in here. Jasper. I said his name quietly, and he stopped. I know. He held my gaze for a moment. Then he turned to Reddington. Stay with her. Reddington nodded once. No argument. No calculation. Just immediate and absolute. Jasper looked at Maverick. With me. They moved. The door opened and closed, and the sound of boots on gravel faded toward the gate, and then it was just Reddington and me and the low rain and the distant radio chatter and the wood stove that had burned down to coals. Reddington didn't sit. He moved to the window that faced the gate and stood there, and I could see the line of his shoulders and the tension moving through them like weather. And I thought about what he had said 20 minutes ago, that you'll leave and it'll matter. I stood up. My legs were steadier than I expected. I moved to stand beside him at the window, and we both looked out at the gray compound and the tree line beyond the fence and the place where the gravel road disappeared into the dark of the timber, and I knew without being able to see it that Conrad Voss was standing at that gate in whatever car he'd driven down from wherever his estate was, and he was doing the thing he always did. Calculating. He's going to say the arrangement was incomplete, I said. That I was delivered incorrectly. That there are terms that weren't honored. I paused. He'll find a language for it that sounds legal. He always does. Reddington was quiet. He won't say he wants me back, I continued. Because he doesn't. He'll say he wants to modify the terms. Which means he's found something he needs, and he thinks I'm still the currency for it. He can think whatever he wants, Reddington said. Low. Controlled. The voice of someone holding something very tightly. He has a legal arrangement, I said. Your pack accepted it. Our pack accepted a debt payment, Reddington said. Not a person on a lease. I looked at the side of his face. The strong line of his jaw. The way his eyes tracked the gate with the focused stillness of a man who had learned to read danger from a long distance. What if he has grounds? I said. Legally. Within pack law. What happens then? He turned to look at me, and his eyes were very dark and very direct and full of something that had finished its internal argument sometime in the last 10 minutes and arrived at a conclusion that surprised even him. Then we pay the debt, he said. I stared at him. $200,000. Yes. Reddington. I know what it is, he said. I can count. That's not. You can't just. Stephanie. He said my name, and the way he said it stopped me completely. Not commanding. Not soft. Just certain. The way you say a thing when you have decided it is true and no longer require agreement to sustain it. He doesn't get to do this again. Not here. Not to you. My throat closed. I looked at him, and I thought about his mother, and I thought about the compound he had built with Jasper and Maverick in the timber country outside of town that stopped growing in 1987 and never noticed. I thought about 31 people living inside those chain link walls because someone had given them a place that had rules they chose to follow. I thought about a second blanket on the end of a couch. You don't owe me that, I said. No, he agreed. I don't. Something in my chest broke open quietly. Outside, movement. Jasper and Maverick coming back across the compound. And even from this distance, and through the streaked window glass, I could read Jasper's body. The controlled fury in his stride. The set of his jaw. The way Maverick was slightly behind him, and slightly tense in the particular way of someone managing the fallout radius of a man who is very angry and very disciplined about it. They came through the door. Jasper looked at me first. Always me first, I was realizing. Whatever room he walked into, whatever the situation. He's claiming the delivery was conditional, Jasper said. He says there was a secondary term that wasn't disclosed at transfer. He wants a meeting inside the compound to discuss revision. The room was very quiet. What was the secondary term, I said. Jasper's jaw was tight enough that the old scar along it had gone white at the edges. He's claiming the arrangement included the right of return, he said. If the pack couldn't utilize the arrangement as intended. The word utilize sat in the room like something rotten. Maverick's expression was the flattest I had seen it. Reddington had gone very still beside me. He's lying, I said. I know he's lying, Jasper said. Can you prove it? He looked at me, and the dread from earlier was gone. What had replaced it was something harder and quieter and more dangerous. Not yet, he said. But I will. How long does he have to wait at the gate? Maverick said. As long as we want, Jasper said. Then let him wait, Reddington said. In the rain. Something moved through all three of them. A collective settling, a shared exhale, the specific quality of three people who have made a decision together without needing to vote on it. They turned to me. All three. At the same moment. And the weight of their attention was not heavy. It was the first thing in 11 years that had felt like the opposite of heavy. What do you want, Stephanie? Jasper said. Nobody had asked me that in so long that the question itself was the most destabilizing thing that had happened since I arrived. I looked at him, then at Reddington, then at Maverick, and I said the truest thing I had said in 11 years. I want to stop running, I said. I want to stop being something someone else decides the value of. My voice was steady. I made it stay steady. And I want Conrad Voss to understand that whatever he thinks he is owed, he already spent it. The room held. Jasper looked at me with those dark, careful eyes, and something in them was not careful at all anymore. Okay, he said quietly. Just that. Okay. Like it was simple. Like it had always been simple, and the only thing required was for someone to finally say the true thing out loud. Outside, Conrad Voss waited at the gate in the rain. And inside, something that had been broken for 11 years sat very still in a warm room and felt, for the first time, like it might be worth the cost of repair. Jasper walked back out to the gate alone. He told us to stay inside, and the way he said it left no room for negotiation. Not commanding, just absolute. The voice of a man who had made a decision and was walking toward it and didn't need company for the walk. Reddington stood at the window. Maverick stood at the door. I stood in the middle of the room, and I breathed, and I listened to the rain, and I waited, and I did not let myself think about what Conrad Voss's face looked like when Jasper told him whatever Jasper was about to tell him. I had spent enough years studying that face. I was done giving it space in my head. He's talking, Reddington said quietly, watching through the glass. I didn't ask what they were saying. The distance was too great, and the rain swallowed everything. All I could see was the shape of it. Jasper at the gate, upright and still, and on the other side Conrad Voss, and the body language of the two men telling the whole story, without a single word reaching me. Conrad gestured. Jasper didn't move. Conrad stepped closer to the gate. Jasper still didn't move. And then Conrad did something I had never seen him do in 11 years. He stepped back. Reddington made a quiet sound. What? Maverick said. Voss just stepped back from the gate, Reddington said. Maverick went still. I pressed my hand flat against my sternum without meaning to. 2 minutes passed. Then Jasper turned and walked back toward the main building, and the gate stayed closed, and the vehicle on the other side of it didn't move, and then it did. Reversing, turning, headlights sweeping through the rain and the tree line, and then disappearing. Gone. Jasper came through the door. He was wet across the shoulders, and his jaw was set, and he looked at me the moment he crossed the threshold, and something in his expression was different from every previous version of his expression I had cataloged. Something had been resolved in it. Some internal negotiation, finally settled. He's gone, he said. What did you tell him? Maverick said. I told him the debt was paid. Jasper reached into his jacket and produced a folded document. The original transfer paperwork. I recognized the format even from across the room. And he set it on the table. Reddington. Reddington turned from the window. I need your signature, Jasper said. Maverick's already verbal. Pack law requires 2 generals to void an external arrangement. Reddington looked at the document on the table, then at Jasper, then at me. He crossed the room, picked up the pen that Jasper had set beside the document, and signed his name in the specific, deliberate way of someone who has thought about a signature before they make it. He set the pen down, and the arrangement was void. The room was very quiet for a moment. Just the rain and the wood stove coals and 4 people standing in the rearranged geography of a decision that couldn't be undone. I looked at the document on the table. 11 years. 11 years and a brass clock and a piece of paper slid across mahogany and $200,000 that wasn't really about money. And now a different piece of paper. A different table. Scarred and honest and real. Stephanie. Jasper's voice. I looked up. He was standing 3 feet away, and his expression was open in the way it had been for that brief window at the counter this morning before the day happened to us, and it was more than that now. It was open and decided and slightly terrifying in the way that only true things are terrifying. You're not a debt payment, he said. You haven't been since the moment you walked through that gate. I need you to know that. I know that, I said. I need you to believe it. I looked at him. At the scar along his jaw and the dark, careful eyes that had found me in a floodlit compound in the rain and hadn't looked away since. I'm working on it, I said honestly. Something in his face shifted into something almost warm. That's enough, he said. That's more than enough. Maverick moved to the wood stove and added 2 logs without being asked, and the fire caught, and the warmth in the room expanded, and he settled back into his chair with the ease of a man who had decided something privately and was at peace with it. Reddington moved to the counter. He poured 4 mugs of coffee and brought them to the table one at a time, and set them down and sat across from me and looked at me with those dark, complicated eyes that weren't complicated in the same way anymore. "You said you wanted to stop running," he said. "Yes," I said. "This pack has 31 people," he said. 32 now if you want it." My breath caught. Maverick looked at the ceiling with a small private smile. Jasper watched my face. I looked at Reddington and I thought about his mother and about 7 years old and about the thing he had built out here in the timber country because someone had to build something that worked differently. I thought about a second blanket on the end of a couch. About the way he had signed his name without hesitating. 32, I said quietly. He nodded once. Something in his face settled into something I didn't have a word for yet, but recognized in my body. The specific warmth of being counted. Of being included in a number that mattered. Jasper reached across the table. His hand open. Waiting. The same gesture I had made to him hours ago in a room that felt like a different lifetime. I looked at his hand. Then I placed mine in it. His fingers closed over mine, and the warmth of it moved up through my wrist and my arm and into my chest, and it wasn't the same as before. Before had been tentative. Asking. This was something else. This was an answer. Maverick leaned forward and wrapped both hands around his coffee mug and said, without looking at either of us, "For the record, I called this in the first 10 minutes. At the gate, when she held Jasper's stare in the rain." "Nobody asked you," Reddington said. "I'm aware," Maverick said pleasantly. "I'm just establishing the historical record." Something happened in my chest that I hadn't felt in so long I almost didn't recognize it. It took me a full 10 seconds to identify it. It was lightness. Actual, physical, ridiculous lightness. The kind that lives in the upper chest and makes breathing easier and has no relationship to circumstances and every relationship to the specific feeling of being exactly where you are supposed to be. I laughed. It came out small and slightly surprised, and probably not pretty, and I pressed my free hand briefly over my mouth, and when I looked up, all 3 of them were looking at me, and none of them were laughing, but all 3 of them were affected, changed by the small sound of it in a way that showed on their faces whether they wanted it to or not. Jasper's hand tightened over mine. Just slightly. Just enough. The fire caught fully in the wood stove, and the warmth pushed out into the room, and the rain came down over Crestfall steady and clean, and the kind of rain that doesn't apologize, the kind that just keeps coming until everything that needed washing has been washed. I sat at the long scarred table with my hand in Jasper's, and my coffee going warm between my palms, and Reddington across from me, and Maverick beside the fire, and I thought, this is what 32 feels like. And then Jasper's thumb moved slowly across my knuckles. Once. Deliberate. And he looked at me with those dark eyes and opened his mouth and said, quietly, like something he had been holding since the gate, "There's something I need to tell you. About the debt. About why Voss really came today." The fire cracked. Maverick went very still. Reddington set his mug down slowly. And the warmth in Jasper's eyes didn't leave, but underneath it, something moved that made my next breath come out uneven. Something that looked like a truth he had been carrying since before I arrived. Since before the gate. Since before the van, and the zip ties and the rain. "The debt," he said quietly. "Conrad Voss didn't borrow that money, Stephanie." My heart stopped. "We paid it," he said. "To him. 2 years ago. The fire. The rain." My hand still in his. "We paid Conrad Voss $200,000, Jasper said, his voice low and certain and devastatingly gentle. "To find you." The room tilted, and the last thing I heard before the silence swallowed everything was Maverick, barely a whisper. "We've been looking for you for a long time." Thank you so much for listening. I tried something a little different this time. I'd love to know if it worked for you. Drop your thoughts in the comments below. Much love, see ya.